In 1974, Jerry and Antone Betz were walking in the woods with their oldest son Terry, 21, on their property on Fort George Island in Jacksonville, Florida. They found a shiny, heavy sphere that looked similar to a bowling ball. However, in addition to not having any finger holes, the 8-inch diameter, 22-pound sphere also weighed more than the heaviest bowling ball, which weighs between 6 to 16 pounds. Was it an old cannonball? It didn't look like one and was in far too good of shape. Still, it was unique, so Terry took it home. They had it for 2 weeks before they said weird things started happening. For instance, when Terry played guitar, the ball hummed back. The Betzes also reported that the ball rolled around on its own and emitted a high-pitched noise that they didn't hear, but that would make their dog whine and cover its ears. They heard something too, though. Mysterious organ music, even though there was no organ in their home. They also claimed that doors suddenly started slamming shut on their own as well. They contacted the newspaper, hoping someone would know what it was and give them some answers. The Jacksonville Journal sent out Lou Egner, a photographer. He verified witnessing the ball move on its own. Shortly after the story ran locally, it was picked up nationally and even internationally, or, as we say these days, it went viral, determining the Betz mystery sphere's origins. But what was the ball? Was it something man-made, or did it have extraterrestrial origins, as the Betz family and many others believed? One of the people who took an interest in the story of the mysterious sphere was Carl Wilson from Omega One, a holistic institute in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He traveled to the Betz's house in Florida to examine the ball and determined not only that a magnetic field surrounded it, but also that it was transmitting a radio signal. The U.S. Navy wanted to take a look at it and determine if it was something of theirs. Had it come from a naval station, Mayport, which is right near Fort George Island? Jerry Betz, who became the family and the ball's spokesperson, gave them 2 weeks to study it, but she also made them sign a contract that they'd return it if they determined it wasn't government property. The Navy determined it wasn't government issued, but they didn't know what it was either, or rather, what it might have been used for. X-rays revealed 3 or 4 smaller spheres inside, but it wasn't radioactive or explosive, nor did they detect any sort of magnetic field or radio signal like Carl Wilson claimed. Metallurgist Fred Thompson, who examined the ball for the Navy, determined it was made of a high-grade stainless steel. The Navy said it was impossible to determine anything more without cutting it up, but Jerry refused to let them do that. Another thing they noted was that it never rolled around on its own while they studied it. But why did it happen at the Betz's house then? The Navy theorized, quote, its tendency to move around was due to a small triangular chip in the surface that threw off its otherwise perfect balance, end quote, and that it was likely uneven floors in the Betz's old home that sent it rolling. At that time, the Inquirer was offering $50,000 for proof of ETs or UFOs, and even though the National Enquirer wasn't taken seriously, even back then, the members of their panel each was a scientist or engineer. Among them was J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer professor at Northwestern University and a member of the Astrophenomenon Research Organization, APRO. Thanks to his book, The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, he was also probably the best-known ufologist at that time. Dr. Hynek agreed that the ball was stainless steel, 431 to be exact, and likely of terrestrial origin. However, he acknowledged it was possible extraterrestrials could also produce such a material. Like the Navy, he also noted it never moved on its own while he was studying it. The only other thing he and his panel deduced was that it rattled slightly when shaken. There were a few plausible guesses beyond it being something of UFO origins to explain what the mystery sphere likely was. For instance, an April 16, 1974 article in the Tampa Times reported that a caller to the United Press International UPI identified himself as an employee of Bell System Laboratories. He admitted he hadn't seen the ball in person, but from his description, it sounded like a tide and current transcriber of a type used in oceanographic research. Quote, technicians from St. Regis Company Paper Mill identified it as a ball check valve from some large pipes used in their factory. End quote. When papers ran that Robert Edwards, a then president of Jacksonville Supply Company, contacted UPI and reported to show him a brand new similar stainless steel ball they had in stock, it was manufactured by Bell & Howell in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and weighed and measured the same as the Betz Mystery Sphere. But did the ball actually come to Fort George Island by way of artist James Durling Jones? He'd created sculptures using similar balls and had even passed through Jacksonville in 1971, collecting scrap metal. A friend of his there had given Durling Jones large industrial ball check valves from the company he worked at, some the exact size and weight of the Betz Mystery Sphere. When he ran out of the room to store them in his Volkswagen van, he put them in the luggage rack on the roof, where a few ended up rolling off. That's the explanation most people believe solves the mystery of how the ball came to be on the Betz property. Of course, all of this seemed too mundane, not only for the Betz family, but for those who believed the sphere was extraterrestrial in nature. There was a way to definitely get to the bottom of it, cut it up, but Jerry Betz refused, which tells me she really didn't want to know what it was that bad after all. So what happened to the Betz family and its ball? The one thing Jerry Betz didn't appreciate was how much interest the ball would generate. The family had lived a quiet life on their 20-acre property up until that point. Now the phone rang off the hook 24/7 with people wanting to see the ball and offering theories and warnings about it. There was only one thing to do. The Betz family packed up their ball and retreated from the spotlight. But the home where they brought the sphere has a history of its own. Jacksonville architect Mellon C. Greeley built the Tudor Revival-style home with the circular entry tower where the Betz family lived in 1927 for Nettleton Neff, a Chicago businessman. Sadly, Neff's wife and 3 children died 6 months after construction started. Neff ended up committing suicide and never saw his castle-like home completed. It sat empty until years later when Kenneth Merrill bought it as a holiday retreat for his family. He owned Merrill Stevens Shipbuilding Company and the St. Johns River Shipbuilding Company and the Merrill Dynamite Company. They owned it up until they sold it to the Betz in 1967. As the Jacksonville Historical Society explained, the Betz family was the first to live in it as a full-time home. They added a kitchen wing as well as a garage and swimming pool to the 21-room mansion. The Betz sold the home to Fairfield Communities in 1985. They used it as housing during archaeological projects until the Florida Park Service bought the property in 1989, which they used as office space and a ranger residence. In 2002, serious structural problems forced them to remove the wing that the Betzes had added, and then that was sort of the end of the house being used at all. It was sealed up, never to be used again after that. It's now part of the Fort George Island Cultural State Park and is marked with no trespassing signs. Normally, one would condone trespassing. Not only is it disrespectful, but it's dangerous. However, every once in a while, it can lead to good things. In fact, I owe the resurrection of one of my favorite destinations, the Jekyll Island Club, to trespassing urbexers. Paranormal investigator and author Chaz CMP's latest book, A Place Between Time and Space, a true story of ghosts, UFOs, and Florida's strangest home, details the full story of the Betz house, as well as his investigations of the property, which he concedes were done illegally and without permission, after he tried to obtain permission, but his requests were denied. He argues the house is a window into Florida history. The house is situated on Mount Cornelia, which isn't a mountain, but is the highest point in Duval County. 5,000 years ago, Timucua tribesmen lived on the land. The first Protestant prayer in the new land was prayed there when John Ribbles landed on the island in 1550. The British built Fort George there 200 years after that. The house is but a small part of the history, but one Chaz argues should be preserved instead of being left to rot in the wet heat of Florida, as has been the case. He'd like to see it receive the same care and protection as two other nearby Fort George Island gems, the Kingsley Plantation and the Ribald Club. He's so passionate about it that he's created a petition he'd like to submit to the U.S. National Park Services to save the Betz Sphere historical house. He's imploring fellow paranormal enthusiasts and historians, whether they be Florida residents or not, to sign.